The dust never really settles in the high desert. It hangs in the air, a golden haze that turns the setting sun into a bloody smudge on the horizon. On a day like any other, that dust began to churn, not from the wind, but from the hooves of a dozen horses. They came from the east, a ragged line of men whose faces were as hard and cracked as the earth beneath them. They were not lost. They had a purpose, and it was etched in the grim set of their jaws and the way their hands never strayed far from the worn leather of their gun belts. They were hunting. In a shallow canyon, hidden by ancient, twisted junipers, a young Apache warrior watched their approach. His name was whispered by the wind through the pines, and he moved with a silence that belonged to the land itself. He was not alone. Behind him, sheltered in the shadow of a great red rock, was a woman. She was not of his people. Her dress was a faded calico, the fabric worn thin but clean, and her hair was the color of winter wheat, plaited tightly against her scalp. The townsfolk called her widow, a name given not out of cruelty, but a simple tragic fact. She was a ghost in her own right, a pale figure seen at the edge of the settlement, speaking little, her eyes holding a distance that most mistook for sorrow. The Apache knew her as something else. He had found her months before, injured and alone after a wagon mishap, and in the quiet way of his people had offered protection. He did not know why the men were coming, only that their intent was violent, and that the woman had asked for his help. For him, that was enough. His honor, his very life, was now a thread tied to her safety. The men below were led by a figure with a silver star pinned to his vest, though the law he represented felt thin and personal. His eyes, the color of flint, scanned the canyon walls. He had a paper in his pocket, a writ signed by a distant authority, but the true drive was a rumor. A whisper that the quiet widow on the edge of their hardscrabble village was more than she seemed. They said she consorted with renegades, that she knew things no simple settler woman should. They were there to take her, to drag her back for questions that would likely be asked at the end of a rope. The Apache watched the leader's hand rise, pointing directly toward their hiding place. A chill that had nothing to do with the desert night crept down his spine. They had been seen. He gestured to the woman, a sharp, fluid motion. They had to move. Now. They slipped from the rock like shadows, weaving through a labyrinth of arroyos. The woman, widow, kept pace with a resilience that surprised him each time. She did not complain, did not falter, her breath coming in steady clouds in the cooling air. As they ran, his mind raced faster than his feet. Why was she so important? What had this quiet woman done to draw such a determined posse? He knew the tensions between his people and the settlers were a taut wire, ready to snap. Protecting her could ignite a conflict his band, already weary and dwindling, could not afford. He was risking everything, his standing, his family, the fragile peace that held a knife's edge against their survival. Yet he could not abandon her. There was a light in her eyes not of fear, but of a fierce, unwavering resolve that commanded his respect. It was a pact made without words. Back in the village, an uneasy silence had fallen. The usual sounds of evening, the blacksmith's final hammer blows, the laughter from the saloon were muted. People gathered in worried clusters, speaking in low tones about the posse that had ridden out at dawn, and about the widow. The old ones, the ones who remembered more, exchanged glances heavy with unspoken knowledge. The storekeeper, a man with ink-stained fingers, nervously straightened jars of remedy on his shelf, his eyes drifting to a small locked chest beneath the counter. The schoolmarm stared out the window of her tiny house, her hand absently touching a faded medical book on her sill. The entire settlement seemed to be holding its breath, each person a piece of a puzzle the Apache warrior could not see. The village was a body, and with the widow gone, it was as if a vital organ had been quietly removed. Life continued, but just barely, and with a shaky, uncertain rhythm. Night fell, a blanket of frigid black pierced by a million sharp stars. The Apache and the widow found a temporary refuge in a cave, its mouth smelling of cool stone and old smoke. He built a small fire, its light dancing on the walls, and for the first time they spoke beyond gestures and urgent whispers. Her voice was low, steady. She asked about his family, his people's stories. He spoke of the mountains as ancestors, of the spirits in the wind. She listened, truly listened, in a way no other white person ever had. In turn, she spoke of her past not with self-pity, but with a strange, clinical distance. She mentioned a life back east, of books and learning, of a husband who had dreamed of bringing medicine to the frontier. When she said the word medicine, her eyes changed, focusing on something far beyond the cave walls. She reached into the small bundle she carried and removed not a keepsake or a Bible, but a few small vials and a carefully wrapped packet of dried herbs. Her hands, which he had thought were the soft hands of a settler, moved with a precise, practiced grace as she examined them. A distant coyote's cry echoed, a sound that was not a coyote. It was a signal from one of the posse's scouts. They were closing in. The Apache tensed, extinguishing the fire with a handful of dirt, plunging them into darkness. The momentary connection was severed, replaced by the immediate metallic taste of danger. He peered out into the moonlit landscape. He could see the dark shapes of men moving, fanning out. They were being surrounded. His plan to lead them on a chase deep into Apache land, to lose them in the maze of canyons he knew by heart, was crumbling. There were too many. He turned to the widow, his voice a bare breath. "We must run to the north, toward the old river bed. It is our only chance." She looked at him, and in the faint starlight he saw not panic, but a deep, calculating sorrow. "They will not stop," she said. "They believe I am a threat. They do not understand what they are truly losing." Before he could ask her what she meant, a shout split the night, far too close. A gunshot rang out, the report terrifyingly loud in the silent expanse, kicking up a spurt of dust 10 feet from the cave mouth. They were out of time. The Apache made a decision in an instant. He would create a distraction, lead the bulk of the men away on a suicidal ride along the ridge, giving her a chance to slip away into the deeper darkness. He told her this, his words quick and final. For the first time, real fear flashed across her face, but not for herself. She gripped his arm, her fingers strong. "No," she said, the words sharp. "You cannot. Your people need you. This territory needs you, these men. They are not just hunting a woman. They are trying to kill the one person who knows how to fight the sickness that is coming." The words hung in the cold air between them. Sickness? The confusion on his face must have been plain, for she rushed on, her whisper now urgent, desperate. "The fever that took the Miller family last spring? It was not a tragedy. It was a test. There is a worse one, carried in the rats on the new supply trains. I have seen its mark on 2 children already in the village. I have been making the tonic, leaving it with the storekeeper, teaching the schoolmarm what to look for. Without me," her voice broke, "without the treatments, it will burn through the settlement like wildfire. It will not stop at the village borders. It will reach your people's camp next. They are hunting their only doctor." The world shifted under the Apache's feet. The quiet widow, the woman he had protected out of a simple, honorable duty, was the village's heart and lungs, its unseen keeper of life. The posse, in their blind suspicion, were not just chasing a renegade's ally. They were trying to cut out their own only hope of survival. And he, in his brave, noble mission to protect her, had now isolated her from the very people who desperately needed her, placing them both in the crosshairs of their own would-be saviors. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He had risked everything to protect her, not realizing the widow was the village's most vital woman. Another shot, closer. A voice the flint-eyed leaders called out, "We know you're in there. Send her out, and you might walk away from this Indian." The Apache looked at the widow, the doctor seeing her entirely anew. The vials in her pack were not trinkets, they were weapons. Her knowledge was a stronger shield than his bow or his knife ever could be. But that knowledge was useless trapped in this canyon. He had to get her back, not just to safety, but to her people, to their people, now. The tension in the cave was a living thing, thick and suffocating. He had a rifle. She had her medicines. Outside, a circle of men with guns and ignorance tightened like a noose. He met her eyes and gave a single, slow nod. The plan had changed. They would not run. They would have to fight their way through, not to escape, but to return. The cliff's edge was not behind them, but ahead, and they were running straight toward it. The next move was his, and a single wrong step would plunge them all into the dark. The silence after the gunshot was worse than the noise. It was a heavy, waiting thing, broken only by the harsh sound of their own breathing in the dark cave. The Apache's mind, usually so clear and focused on the immediate path of a deer or the meaning of a distant bird call, felt split in two. One part listened to the scrape of a boot on gravel outside, calculating angles and escape routes. The other part reeled from the woman's words. A sickness, a doctor. The quiet woman who gathered herbs was gathering defenses. The children he had sometimes seen from a distance, playing near the creek, they were already marked. And his own family, his mother and younger sister and their wickiup up in the high pines, they were downwind of a storm they did not even know was coming. He looked at the vials in her hand. They seemed so fragile. "How long?" he whispered, the words gritty. "For the two children, maybe 3 days before the fever takes them fully. For the others, once it shows, it moves fast. A week, less." Her voice had lost its clinical distance. Now it was raw with a helpless urgency. "The tonic can hold it back, can help the body fight, but it is not a cure. I need my books. I need my proper supplies. They are hidden under the floorboards of my cabin. If those men burn it, they would. He knew they would." Suspicion and fear made men destroy first and think later, if they ever thought at all. The leader out there, the one with the star, he was a man who believed in clear solutions. A renegade Indian and a troublesome woman. A match set to both would solve everything. That was his kind of medicine. A new sound came then, not from the front, but from deeper within the cave, a faint trickle of pebbles. The cave had a back way, a narrow crack he had noted when they entered. It was tight, barely passable, and it led up to the mesa top. It was their only move that wasn't a charge into gunfire. He gestured sharply toward the sound, then pointed to her pack. She understood, swiftly tucking the medicines away and securing the bundle. As she moved, he saw her not as a burden to protect, but as a resource to guard, like the last clean spring in a poisoned land. The weight of it was different, heavier. They inched into the darkness, the rock closing around them like a cold fist. The air grew damp and still. He led, feeling his way, listening for the scuff of her feet behind him. His thoughts churned as he crawled. He remembered the first time he had found her. It was near the old salt trail, her wagon with a broken wheel, her horse gone. She was trying to set her own leg, her face white with pain but utterly silent. He had approached slowly, hands visible. He expected fear, screaming. Instead, she had looked at him, really looked, and asked in a strained voice if he could spare any water. It was that practicality that had struck him. No hysterics, no begging, just a need stated. He had helped. In the days that followed, as he brought her food and a crutch he carved, she had offered thanks not with grand words, but with quiet company. She learned a few words of his language. She showed him how to brew a tea from a weed he knew was useless, but when his sister had a cough, that tea soothed it. He had thought it was luck. Now he knew it was skill. The crack opened suddenly onto the mesa top under a vast bowl of stars. The cold wind hit them, a cleansing slap. They were above the posse. He could see the faint glow of their small fires below. hear the muffled curse of a man who had kicked a rock. They had bought minutes, no more. He pointed north, toward a deeper blackness that was a stand of pines. We go there. Then east, around them. Back to the village. She nodded, but her face was troubled. They will have left someone there, watching my cabin. Then we do not go to your cabin first, he said. The beginning of a plan, fragile as a spider's web, started to form. We find the storekeeper, the school teacher, the people who know. They are afraid, she said. Fear makes people quiet. Then we must make them loud, he replied, though he did not know how. They moved across the open mesa, two shadows against the starry sky. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to put miles between them and the hunters, to take her deep into the lands where his people could shield them. But that would be a death sentence for the settlement, and eventually for his own band. The sickness did not care about borders drawn on maps or hatreds held in hearts. It was a beast that fed on breath. Her duty was to fight it. His duty, he now saw, was to get her to the fight. Back in the village, the night was not quiet. In the small house beside the schoolhouse, the schoolmarm was not sleeping. She was sitting at her table, a single candle guttering, staring at the faded medical book the widow had lent her. It was open to a page about fevers, about the patterns of rashes. Her mind kept circling back to the two children in her class. They had been tired, listless. She had thought it was the summer heat. Then she saw the faint, red dots on the smaller one's wrists when he reached for a slate. The widow had seen them too, had pulled her aside after class. Her instructions had been calm, specific. Keep them isolated. Give them this tea every few hours. Tell no one yet, to avoid panic. The schoolmarm had agreed, her heart thumping with a dread she didn't fully understand. Now, with the posse gone and the widow vanished, the dread had solidified into a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She was a teacher of letters and sums, not a nurse. What if she was wrong? What if she was making it worse? A soft, insistent tap came at her window. She nearly jumped from her skin. Peering through the glass, she saw the pale, worried face of the storekeeper's wife. She hurried to the door, letting the woman slip inside. The woman's eyes were wide. "My husband," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He's gone to the meeting house with some of the others. They're talking. They say the widow was working with that Apache to poison the well, to drive us off the land for his people." "That's foolishness," the schoolmarm said, but her own voice lacked conviction. She had seen the way the widow looked at the Apache when he occasionally appeared at the tree line, how she would leave a wrapped parcel on a certain rock. She had assumed it was food, a strange friendship. Now she wondered what was really in those parcels. "Is it?" the storekeeper's wife pressed. "Then why did she come to my Henry just last week, giving him bottles of some bitter stuff, telling him to keep it safe? She paid him with a gold coin, a real one. Where does a widow get gold? And why the secrecy?" The woman leaned closer. "They found something in her cabin when they searched it before riding out. Papers, drawings of bodies like a butcher's diagrams, and a map with markings near the Apache winter grounds." The schoolmarm felt the world tilt. Drawings of bodies? A map? It sounded like guilt. It sounded like conspiracy. The careful, kind woman who had helped tend a child's split knee after a fall, who had a calm word for every one. Could that all have been a mask? The seed of doubt, planted by fear, began to send out roots. She looked at the medical book on her table. Was it a manual for healing or for something else? Out on the mesa, the Apache and the widow reached the pines. The cover was a relief, but the warrior did not slow. Time was a river rushing past them. He needed to understand more. "The sickness," he said as they walked swiftly through the dark trees. "You said it comes from the rats on the trains. My people have sickness sometimes. Coughing sickness. Wasting sickness. Is this the same?" She shook her head, her profile a pale sliver in the gloom. "No, This is different, more cruel. It brings a high fever, pain in the joints so bad it feels like the bones are breaking. Then a rash like bruises under the skin. Then the bleeding. From the nose, the gums. It is called the black fever in the old texts. I saw it once back east in a port city. It wiped out a whole tenement building. And you know how to stop it? I know how to try, she corrected him, and the honesty in her voice was more frightening than any boast. It is about strength. The tonic supports the body's own strength. Clean water, rest, isolation to stop its spread. But without care, the weak, the very old, the very young, those already hungry, will die. Many will die. He thought of his sister's laughing eyes, of his mother's hands, worn from work but always gentle. The image of them suffering this black fever was a physical pain in his chest. This was no longer about honor or a promise made to one woman. This was about a line in the sand, drawn not between red man and white, but between the healthy and the damned. A distant howl echoed again, this time from the north. The posse was moving, searching. They had found the back crack in the cave. The hunt was on again, but now the hunters were between them and the village. The Apache stopped, listening, reading the night. He could lead her on a wider circle, adding hours, maybe a full day to their journey. But she had said they only had days. There was a shorter way, a dangerous way. It cut through the heart of a box canyon, a place his people avoided. It was called the Whispering Place. The rocks there were unstable, prone to slides. More than that, it was said the spirits of those who had died in sudden, hard ways lingered there, confused and angry. It was a place of bad medicine. But it would cut miles off their path and bring them out near the creek that ran behind the settlement. He told her of the choice. The direct, dangerous path or the longer, safer one. She did not hesitate. The children do not have time for safer, she said. Her face was set in the starlight filtering through the pines. It was the face of a woman who had already seen too much death and was determined to stand against the next wave. In that moment, she looked less like a settler's widow and more like a war chief, preparing for a battle only she could see. He nodded, a new respect settling deep within him. Then we go through the Whispering Place. Stay close. Do not speak, no matter what you hear. They changed direction, heading toward a deeper blackness where even the starlight seemed afraid to go. As they left the shelter of the pines, the wind carried a new sound to them, the faint, frantic ringing of the village's church bell, tolling not for service, but for alarm. Something had happened. The knot in the Apache's stomach tightened. Were they already too late? The bell clanged again and again, a desperate heartbeat against the vast, indifferent night, pulling them toward the canyon, toward the village, toward a destiny that felt as narrow and treacherous as the dark path that now lay ahead. The bell's sound died somewhere in the vast distance between the mesa and the village, swallowed by the night, but its echo lingered in the air like a threat. The Apache warrior felt its vibration in his bones. An alarm could mean many things. Had the posse returned empty-handed and stirred up anger? Had the sickness broken its fragile cage and shown itself in a way no one could ignore? Or had someone found the storekeeper's hidden chest or the schoolmarm's book and pieced together a story more dangerous than the truth? Every possibility was bad. He glanced at the woman beside him, the widow, the doctor. Her jaw was set, but in the faint light he could see the pulse quick in her throat. She was thinking the same things. They stood at the mouth of the Whispering Place. The canyon entrance was a mere slit in the rock face, darker than the surrounding darkness. A stale, dry breath seemed to exhale from it, carrying the scent of old dust and something else, something metallic and cold. It was not a place for the living. His people's stories said the rocks here remembered the cries of those trapped in a long-ago landslide, and on quiet nights they whispered those cries back to the wind. He pushed the stories aside. The living children's cries were more urgent than the echoes of the dead. "Stay directly behind me," he said, his voice barely a breath. Place your feet where I place mine. The ground is loose. They entered the slit. The world closed in, the walls so narrow his shoulders nearly brushed both sides. The sky became a ragged strip of stars far above, feeling more like a taunt than a comfort. The only sounds were the careful scuff of their moccasins and boots on the shale and the pounding of their own hearts. Then came the whispers. At first it was just the wind, funneled and twisted through the strange stone channels. But the mind, in such a place, shapes what it hears. A low moan that might have been air through a crack sounded like a child's whimper. A trickle of pebbles became a sigh. The widow's breathing grew sharper behind him. He did not look back. To stop was to let the place get its hooks into you. In the village, the bell had been rung by the blacksmith, a bear of a man whose strength was usually a comfort. Now his face was slick with a sweat that had nothing to do with his forge. He stood in the center of the muddy street, the bell rope still in his hand, as a cluster of frightened people gathered. The two sick children had taken a turn. Their fevers had spiked so high they had begun to shake uncontrollably, their small bodies racked with tremors. The younger one had coughed and a speckle of bright red blood had appeared on his mother's apron. Panic, held at bay by ignorance and the widow's quiet instructions, had finally broken its leash. "Where is she?" the mother demanded, her voice shrill with terror. The widow! She knew! She gave them tea. What was in it? The schoolmarm stood at the edge of the crowd, her arms wrapped around herself. The storekeeper, a wiry man named Henry, stood beside his wife, his face pale. He was thinking of the bitter bottles under his counter, the gold coin that felt hot in his memory. The posse's story of poison and conspiracy was no longer just a story. It was an explanation for the horror unfolding before them. Fear needed a villain, and the absent widow and the renegade Apache made for perfect ones. "They say she's with that Indian," a man muttered from the crowd. "Maybe the poison was just the start. Maybe they're coming back to finish what they started." The blacksmith looked from the terrified mother to the angry, confused faces around him. The man with the star, the posse leader, was still out there hunting. The blacksmith felt the weight of a decision he did not want to make. "Bar the windows," he said, his voice gruff. "Postguards. No one comes in or out until the marshal returns. And someone needs to check her cabin. For real this time. Tear it apart. Find out what she was really doing." Inside the whispering place, the Apache's foot dislodged a larger stone. It clattered down the narrow path, the noise absurdly loud, setting off a tiny cascade of gravel. The whispers seemed to grow louder in its wake, a hissing chatter that felt angry, disturbed. He froze, listening with every part of himself. Beyond the wind's mockery, he heard a new sound, the distant clear call of a whippoorwill. But it was the wrong season for whippoorwills. It was a signal, used by men who thought they were being clever. The posse was not just behind them. They were ahead too, having guessed the route or flanked them. They were at the far end of the canyon. He turned slowly, meeting the widow's eyes in the deep gloom. He put a finger to his lips, then pointed forward, and made a cutting motion across his throat. Enemies. Ahead. Her eyes widened, but she gave a single, tight nod. They were trapped in a stone throat, with hunters at both ends. The only choices were to hide, to fight, or to try to climb the sheer, whispering walls. He leaned close, his mouth almost touching her ear. "Can you climb?" he murmured, the words lost in the rock. She looked up at the narrow ribbon of sky. She was not a climber. She was a healer, her strength in her hands and her mind. But she nodded again. "I can try." He began to search the wall with his hands, finding fingerholds invisible to the eye. It was slow, desperate work. As he helped her find a purchase for her boot, his hand brushed the bundled pack that held her medicines. The vials clinked softly. That small, glassy sound felt like a shout in the quiet canyon. They both froze. From the direction of the village end of the canyon, a new sound echoed, not a bird call, but the rough voice of the man with the star. "You in there? We know you're cornered. Send her out, and we'll talk about that Apache. Keep hiding, and we'll smoke you out like the vermin you are." The threat was clear. They would build a fire at one end, let the smoke pour through the narrow passage. It would be a cruel, effective end. The Apache's mind raced. A fire would take time to build, to catch. It might give them minutes. He redoubled his efforts, hauling the widow up to a small ledge, then climbing past her to find the next. Their progress was agonizingly slow. The voices from the canyon entrance grew louder, more confident. They were arguing about the best kind of wood for smoke. On the ledge, pressed against the cold rock, the widow was not thinking of the fire or the men. She was thinking of the blood on the child's lips. She was calculating the time lost, the fever's march. Her medicines were not here. They were in her cabin or in the storekeeper's chest. If these men burned her cabin, or if the storekeeper, in his fear, destroyed the tonic, it was all for nothing. Her husband's dream, her own hard-won knowledge, the lives of everyone in that valley, all reduced to ashes and fear. A cold, clear anger began to burn through her own fear, hotter than any fever. These men, in their stubborn ignorance, were not just hunting her. They were murdering their own future with every passing minute. The Apache pulled her up to another ledge, wider this time. They were perhaps 20 feet above the canyon floor. The climbing would get harder from here, the rock smoother. He peered over the edge. He could see the flicker of torchlight now, dancing on the walls near the entrance. Shadows moved, large and menacing. They were starting their fire. Then, from the far end of the canyon, the end that led toward the Apache lands, a different light appeared. Not the warm, wavering light of torches, but a cool, steady, silvery glow. A lantern. And with it, a figure appeared, standing at the mouth of the slit, silhouetted against the moon-washed desert beyond. It was a man, but not one of the posse. He stood perfectly still, holding the lantern high. The voices at the other end fell silent. The man with the star called out, "Who's there? Identify yourself." The figure with the lantern did not speak. Instead, he took a step forward into the canyon. The light glinted off something in his other hand, not a gun, but something long and slender. A rifle. He took another step, his movement calm, deliberate. He was not hiding. He was presenting himself. And he was placing himself squarely between the posse's fire and the two climbers on the wall. The Apache stared, his breath caught in his chest. He knew that silhouette, the way the man held his head. It was his uncle, a man of few words and deep counsel, an elder who had argued against helping the white woman months ago. He had come. He had followed. And he was walking alone into a canyon filled with armed, angry men. It was not a rescue. It was a distraction. A sacrifice. The widow, seeing the new figure, gasped softly. She didn't know who he was, but she understood the act. It was a shield. The Apache's hand tightened on the rock. Every instinct told him to call out, to slide down, to stand with his kin. But his uncle's plan was clear. It was a trade. Their escape for his own capture, or worse. To waste the gift would make it worthless. Below, the man with the star raised his own rifle, aiming at the new arrival. "That's far enough. Drop the lantern and put your hands in the air." The Apache's uncle did not drop the lantern. He raised it higher, making himself a perfect target. His voice, when it came, was old and rough, but it carried through the stone channel with a strange, clear power. "You are looking in the wrong hole," he called out, his words in slow, careful English. "The sickness you fear is not in this canyon. It is in your own houses. The woman you hunt carries the cure. And you are lighting a fire to burn your only chance." The words hung in the smoky air. For a moment, there was only the crackle of the kindling beginning to catch. Then, from high on the ledge, clutching her bundle of vials that felt suddenly so futile, the widow did the one thing the Apache had told her not to do. She spoke. Her voice, raised and clear, rang off the stone walls, a declaration thrown down into the dark. "He speaks the truth. The black fever is already among you. The children are bleeding. If you do not let me pass to my medicines, your own will be dead by sunrise." Her words, filled with a healer's authority and a mother's desperation, echoed and fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the hungry sound of the newly born fire. The echo of the widow's shout died, leaving behind a silence so sharp it seemed to cut. Down on the canyon floor, the man with the star, the marshal, slowly lowered his rifle a fraction of an inch. His eyes, narrowed against the lantern's glare from the far end, flicked upward, trying to find the source of the woman's voice in the tangled shadows of the rock face. The fire at his feet crackled, sending a first, tentative plume of gray smoke curling into the narrow space. It was a truth and a lie, all in one. The sickness was real. The children were sick. But the woman was still the outsider, the one found with the enemy. Trust was a broken wagon wheel here, and no words could make it roll straight again. "The only fever here is your treachery," the marshal called back, but his voice lacked its earlier certainty. He glanced at the men beside him, their faces painted in uneasy orange by the firelight. One of them, a younger man whose wife had just had a baby, shifted his weight from foot to foot. "My boy," he started, his voice thin. "He's been awful warm." "Quiet," the marshal snapped, but the damage was done. A ripple of doubt passed through the posse, colder than the canyon's chill. The absolute clarity of their hunt was muddied. At the other end of the canyon, the Apache's uncle stood unwavering, the lantern held high like a challenge. He had said his piece. Now he waited, a solitary figure between the encroaching smoke and the armed men. His presence was a question. Did they want a villain so badly they would blind themselves to a disaster? On the ledge, the Apache warrior felt the seconds slipping away like sand through a clenched fist. His uncle had given them a chance, but the widow's gamble had turned them from hidden prey into a focal point. The marshal was right about one thing: the smoke was coming. Already, a thin, acrid tendril reached their perch, making the widow cough softly into her sleeve. They could not stay. He looked up. The climb above was smoother, almost sheer for another 10 feet before it broke into a jumble of boulders. Impossible for her. He looked down. The fire was growing. His uncle was a statue of defiance. There was a third way, a desperate, ugly way. Along the wall to their right, a deep shadow hinted at a crevice, a fault line in the rock. It might go nowhere. It might be a trap. But it was the only path not blocked by flame or gunmen. He gripped the widow's arm, pointing. She saw it, her eyes watering from the smoke. She gave a tight, frantic nod. They began to sidle along the narrow ledge, backs pressed to the rock, faces turned away from the growing heat below. The movement was slow, agonizing. Every scrape of boot leather sounded like a thunderclap to their own ears. The marshal, his attention divided between the silent elder and the hidden woman, had not yet seen them. In the village, the scene was descending into chaos worse than any canyon standoff. The 2 sick children had been moved to the meeting house, the closest thing to a public building. Their mothers hovered, faces streaked with tears, while the blacksmith and a few others argued in harsh whispers by the door. The schoolmarm had finally broken, producing the widow's medical book and the instructions she had been given. She showed them to the storekeeper, Henry, whose face went from pale to ashen. "The bottle's under my counter," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "She said it was for fever. She paid me to keep them safe, secret." The word secret now sounded like guilt, even to him. "Or to have them ready," someone muttered. "Ready to finish the job." But the schoolmarm was shaking her head, her finger tracing a line in the book. "Look. It describes it. The fever, the pain in the joints, the bleeding," She looked up, her eyes haunted. She knew what it was. She was trying to fight it, not cause it. The blacksmith, a man who understood the solidity of iron and the clear purpose of a hammer, felt unmoored. Two truths were warring: the posse's story of conspiracy, and the plain, terrible evidence of the sickness before his eyes. If the widow was a poisoner, why were the children still alive after days of her care? If she was a healer, why was she running with an Apache? The question swirled, a toxic mix with no clear antidote. Someone has to go for the county doctor, a woman pleaded from the corner where the children lay. He's a week away at best. The blacksmith roared, his frustration bursting out. The room fell silent except for the ragged, too-fast breathing of the little ones. The terrible arithmetic of distance and time settled over them all. They were alone. Back in the whispering place, the smoke was thickening. The Apache and the widow reached the crevice. It was not much a vertical crack, just wide enough to squeeze into. But it went back and up. It was a chimney, a last desperate gasp of a path. He motioned for her to go first, to brace her back against one wall and her feet against the other, and to shimmy upward. She looked at the technique, then at her worn dress and boots, and for a fleeting moment he saw despair in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by that same fierce resolve. She stuffed her precious bundle of vials into the front of her dress, took a deep breath of the cleaner air deep in the crack, and began to climb. He followed, the rough rock scraping his hands and back. The world narrowed to the push of muscle, the gasp of breath, the distant muffled sounds of argument from below. The smoke found them even here, a ghostly finger reaching into their refuge, carrying with it the scent of juniper and menace. Down on the canyon floor, the marshal made his decision. The old Indian was a distraction. The woman was the key. He ignored the elder and shouted up at the walls. "Last chance, woman. Show yourself and tend to those children if you're so worried. Prove it, or we let this fire burn and go back to town to deal with this sickness ourselves." His words were a trap, and they all knew it. To show herself was to be shot or captured. To stay hidden was to let the accusation of cowardice and falsehood stick. The widow, crammed in the stone chimney, heard him. Her arms shook with strain. The choice was an impossible one. She stopped climbing. The Apache, just below her, felt her hesitation. He could not see her face. "Do not listen," he breathed upward, the words strained. "He speaks to your heart to stop your mind. Keep moving." But then a new voice joined the fray. It was his uncle from the far end. The old man spoke again, not in English, but in their own language, his voice carrying a calm, resonant power that cut through the crackle of the fire. "Nephew, the village is a wounded animal. It does not know its friend from its foe. The healer's truth must be seen, not just heard. There is no path through these guns." The words were not just speech. They were a teaching, a direction. The Apache understood. His uncle was telling him they could not fight their way to the village. They had to get the village to come to them. But how? The people were barricaded, fearful, convinced of a lie. Then a memory flashed in the warrior's mind. A memory from days ago, before all this running. The widow, pointing to a specific plant near the creek, telling him its name in her language and in his. She had said it was rare there, that it only grew in a few places. One of those places was near the old salt trail, close to the Apache winter grounds. The map the posse had found in her cabin, the map that looked like conspiracy, it wasn't a map for attack. It was a foraging map, a healer's map. The markings were for medicine, not for war. The truth was a weapon, but only if you could get someone to hold it. He needed a messenger. Someone the village would listen to. He looked down through the crack, past the billowing smoke, to where his uncle stood, a solitary, proud target. He could not ask that of him. There was no one else. Just as the despair threatened to take root, a sound echoed from high above them, from the rim of the canyon. A small, sharp cascade of pebbles, then another. The Apache tilted his head back, looking up the long, dark chimney. Against the strip of starry sky at the very top, a shape moved. A small, dark shape. Then another. Figures were looking down into the crevice. He tensed, ready to brace for a rifle shot. But no shot came. Instead, a soft, familiar voice called down, a young girl's voice, speaking in the Apache tongue. "Brother?" "We heard the shouting. We saw the fire. Grandmother sent us to find you. It was his sister. And with her, 2 other youths from his band. They had followed their elder, not to fight, but to watch. To help, they were perched on the rim, directly above the chimney. They had ropes for climbing, for gathering piñon nuts. They were not warriors, they were just kids. And they were a thread of hope, dangling right above them." The marshal, seeing the new shadows moving on the rim, raised his rifle again, his voice barking with renewed suspicion. "What's this? An ambush? I knew it." The moment splintered. The widow was trapped in the rock. The Apache's uncle was a sitting target. The children in the village were dying. And now, innocent Apache youths were in the line of fire on the canyon rim. Every possible path was fraught with peril, every choice likely to end in violence. The tension was a wire pulled so tight it hummed, ready to snap into a final, bloody conflict that would solve nothing and doom everyone. The next move, the next word, would send everything tumbling toward an ending no one truly wanted, but that fear and pride were making inevitable. The marshal's shout, accusing an ambush, seemed to hang in the smoky air, pulling every trigger finger taut. Up in the crevice, the Apache warrior made a decision faster than thought. He did not call back to his sister in their shared tongue. Instead, he raised his voice, clear and strong in English, for the men below to hear. "They are children. They carry ropes, not rifles." He then looked up, speaking quickly to the small, worried face above. "The cord! Lower it, now!" For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, a braided leather line, used for hauling firewood, tumbled down the chimney, brushing against the widow's shoulder. It was their thread out of the stone trap, but it was also a provocation. The marshal and his men saw the movement, the dark line against the rock. The young man whose own child was sick cried out, "They're pulling her up! Shoot!" "Wait!" The command did not come from the marshal, but from his own uncle at the far end of the canyon. The old man had not moved, but his voice carried a lifetime of authority. He spoke again to the marshal, each word deliberate. "You are a man who keeps watch, so watch what they do. If they mean harm, your bullet will always find them, but if they mean to heal, you will have shot your only chance." The marshal's jaw clenched, his finger resting on the trigger. He watched as the widow, with a strength born of pure necessity, grasped the rope. She wrapped it around her wrist and foot, the way she had seen sailors do in her youth back east. She looked down at the Apache, who braced himself beneath her, offering his own shoulders as a boost. Their eyes met. No words were needed. He gave a sharp nod. She began to climb, hand over hand, the leather cord biting into her palms, her bundle of vials pressed safely between her body and the rock. No shot was fired. The posse watched, a confused gallery, as she was hauled upwards by the unseen hands above. The Apache followed, climbing swiftly behind her. In moments, they both vanished over the canyon's rim, leaving only the empty rope dangling. A profound silence fell over the whispering place, broken only by the pop of the fire. The marshal stood, his rifle now pointing at the ground, feeling a fool. The old Indian across from him slowly lowered his lantern. He had not come to fight. He had come to make them see. And perhaps they had seen just a little. On the rim, the widow collapsed onto the gritty earth, gasping. The Apache's sister and her friends crouched nearby, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. The warrior went straight to his sister, placing a hand on her head. You were brave. You must be braver now. Run, run back to grandmother. Tell her the black fever is near. Tell her to prepare the old, high camp, to burn the sweetgrass, to keep the children separate. Go, now." The youths melted back into the night without a sound. The Apache turned to the widow. She was already on her feet, scanning the landscape, orienting herself. The village lay to the east, a cluster of darkness. "I have to get to my cabin," she said. "The stronger medicines are there. The book with the full instructions. It will be watched," he said. "Then we give the watchers something else to watch," she replied, her mind already shifting from fugitive to commander. She pointed to a nearby pinyon pine. "Help me gather resin, a good amount, and dry grass." He did not question her. They worked quickly, her explaining in terse phrases. They would not go to the cabin. They would go to the store. The storekeeper had the tonic. He was a nervous man, but he was not evil. He could be reached. The resin, when mixed with grass and lit, would make a thick, pungent smoke. A different kind of signal. Back in the village meeting house, the debate had turned into a grim vigil. The two children were worsening. The storekeeper, Henry, could stand it no longer. The schoolmarm's words, the description in the book, it all matched too well. The widow had known. She had tried to help. While the blacksmith argued with others about posting more guards, Henry slipped out the back. He went to his store, his hands trembling as he unlocked the door. He went behind the counter and pulled out the locked chest. He fumbled for the key, opened it, and stared at the rows of little brown bottles. Medicine or poison? His hand hovered. Then he heard a sound outside, a soft thump against the wall. Then another. A strange, sweet smoky scent began to drift through the cracks in the wall. He rushed to the window. In the field behind the store, a small, controlled fire burned, sending up a thick, white column of smoke. And standing just at the edge of the firelight were two figures, the widow and the Apache. They were not hiding. They were waiting. Henry's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at the bottles in his hand. He looked at the two calm figures outside. He made his choice. He grabbed as many bottles as he could carry, shoved them into a sack, and burst out of the back door. He half ran, half stumbled toward them, expecting a bullet in the back from his own neighbors at any second. He reached them, his chest heaving, and thrust the sack at the widow. "It's here. All of it. The children. The little one isn't breathing right." She took the sack, her face all professional focus. "Are they in the meeting house?" Henry nodded. "Take me there," she said. Then she looked at the Apache. "You should go. Your people need you." He shook his head. "I will see this to the door." My uncle's words were for them, but also for me. To see the truth through. They moved, a strange procession. The terrified storekeeper, the determined widow, and the silent Apache warrior. They walked around the side of the building and straight into the main street toward the glowing windows of the meeting house. They did not run, they walked. The widow held the sack of medicines in front of her like a torch. They were seen immediately. A shout went up. The blacksmith and others poured out of the meeting house, weapons raised. The scene froze again there in the dusty street. The posse, still out in the canyon, was gone. It was just these people, face to face with their fear. The widow spoke first, her voice ringing in the quiet street. "I have the tonic. The children need it now. You can shoot me after I have tried to save them. But if you stop me, you are killing your own." She did not wait for permission. She walked forward, right past the barrel of the blacksmith's rifle. He did not move to stop her. The sheer, audacious clarity of her purpose disarmed him. She entered the meeting house. The Apache stopped at the threshold, a sentinel. He met the blacksmith's gaze, then slowly, deliberately, placed his own knife on the ground at his feet. It was not surrender. It was an offering of peace for now. He then sat down, cross-legged in the doorway, his back to the room, watching the street. He would guard the healer while she worked. Inside, the widow was already moving. She knelt between the two pallets, her hands gentle and sure. She felt foreheads, checked pulses, looked at the rash blooming on their skin. She called for clean water, for cloths, for a spoon. The mothers, seeing the familiar, capable woman, obeyed without thought. She mixed the tonic from Henry's bottles with water, carefully spooning it into the children's mouths, coaxing them to swallow. She instructed the schoolmarm to start another bottle for every adult in the room, a preventative dose. The room, which had been full of panic, became a hushed sickbay, every eye on her work. Hours passed. The night softened into the gray light of dawn. The Apache did not move from his post. The village, exhausted by fear, watched him. Some with anger, some with curiosity, most with a deep, weary confusion. The marshal and his posse returned, empty-handed and sour, only to find their quarry sitting calmly in the heart of the town, the very woman they had hunted now the central figure in a desperate fight for life. As the first real sun rays touched the street, the widow emerged from the meeting house. She looked tired to her bones, but her eyes were clear. She walked to where the Apache sat and stood beside him. She addressed the crowd that had gathered, the blacksmith, the marshal, the storekeeper, and his wife, all of them. The fever is broken in the older child. The younger is still in danger, but his breathing is easier. The fight is not over. This sickness will touch more homes. You must listen now. You must boil all water. You must keep the sick apart. You must take the tonic as I show you. There is no time for your suspicions anymore. The marshal stepped forward, his authority seeming small in the face of hers. And him? He asked, nodding toward the Apache. The widow looked at the warrior, then back at the marshal. He is the reason I am here. He is the reason you have a chance. His people are preparing for this same storm because he sent word. We can face this separately, and many will die on both sides. Or we can face it together, and more will live. That is the only conspiracy that ever was. The marshal was silent for a long time. He looked at the storekeeper, who gave a small nod. He looked at the blacksmith, who simply shrugged, his anger spent. He looked at the weary, hopeful faces of the mothers in the doorway. The truth was no longer a weapon. It was a tool. A heavy, awkward tool, but the only one they had. You'll stay? The marshal asked the widow, his voice grudging. I will stay, she said. This is my village, too. She then looked at the Apache. A deep understanding passed between them, forged in canyon shadows and shared purpose. You should go to your family. Tell them. Tell them we are ready to share what we have. Medicine, knowledge, a fight against the real enemy. The Apache warrior stood. He picked up his knife from the dust, sheathing it. He gave one last, long look at the woman who had been a stranger, then a charge, then an ally. He saw not a widow, but a healer, not a white woman, but a person of courage. He nodded to her, a gesture of profound respect. Then he turned and walked, not with the stealth of a hunted man, but with the straight-back dignity of an emissary, out of the village and toward the rising sun that now warmed the path to his home. The widow watched him go, then turned back to the meeting house, to the work that remained. The crisis was not past, but the corner had been turned. The sickness was a foe they could now face together. The whispers of fear would take time to fade, but in the clear light of that morning, a new kind of quiet had begun, one not of dread, but of a hard-won, fragile hope. They had risked everything, and in doing so, had found the one thing vital to survival not just for a village, but for any people, the courage to see past their own fears and to reach out a hand.